What is the kernel in OS boot process? Imagine turning on your computer and watching it come to life. The process that makes this happen is fascinating and involves many steps. One of the most important parts is something called the kernel. The kernel is like the brain of the operating system. It is the core part that controls everything once the computer starts up. When you press the power button, the computer's hardware begins a process called the boot process. First, the basic input-output system, or the unified extensible firmware interface, checks the hardware. It makes sure the memory, processor, and storage devices are working properly. After this, the bootloader takes over. The bootloader is a small program that finds and loads the kernel into memory. Once the bootloader loads the kernel, it begins to decompress itself if it is compressed. The kernel then starts setting up the system. It configures the central processing unit, which is the main part of the computer that does the work. It also initializes memory, which is where the computer stores data temporarily. The kernel detects hardware devices like your keyboard, mouse, and graphics card, and loads the necessary drivers to make them work. The kernel also mounts the root file system. Think of this as the main storage area where all your files and programs are kept. It loads essential modules and drivers needed for the system to run smoothly. After all this setup, the kernel starts the first user process, often called init. This process is responsible for launching other system services and user applications. Different operating systems have similar roles for their kernels but may do things differently. For example, Linux uses a kernel that is loaded by bootloaders like grub. It decompresses and initializes hardware before starting the system or other init systems. Windows, on the other hand, has its own kernel that performs similar hardware checks and then launches the Windows Session Manager to start system services. In simple terms, the kernel acts as the bridge between your hardware and software. It takes control right after the bootloader finishes its job. It manages all hardware resources and prepares the system so you can start using your computer. Without the kernel, your operating system cannot function. It is the foundation that makes everything else possible during the boot process.